Huh? Who's that? Oh, it's you, Fresnel. You're here for the voice, right? How's this? First, it's Fresnel. Uh, mm. Second, it needs work. But ultimately, that's not why I'm here. Huh? Why are you here then? I'm here on behalf of someone you've contacted a couple of months ago who would like to remain anonymous. Oh? Which one? Oh. Yeah, the response is here. Wow, it's that long? I don't know. If I opened it before I got to you, I'd be violating mailing laws. Oh yeah, true. Well, since you're here, do you want to read it together? Why? Because it's an interview? How? Look, don't question it, just bring it here. 1. Do you remember how you got into working on PMD Explorers? So, it was actually very soon after I started joining online communities and art galleries. I was kind of a lurker on DeviantArt for a while because I actually wanted to be a Fakemon artist. But I was always a fan of Pokemon and was following some Pokemon artists, and eventually stuff with the group ended up in my feed. I was really inspired by the prompts and such. I'd come up with team ideas and such in my head, doodle designs for them, and brainstorm how they'd do some of the early prompts, but then, I don't remember who, but I remember seeing a community member's character get made it canon as an NPC, so I was like, hey, maybe if I do that, I'll get noticed. I was still a teenager at the time, and essentially a new kid on the block when it came to art communities, and the group had some super creative people running it and making comics for it. So I came up with the concept of Barty. I thought it'd be handy if the group had a sort of fast travel system as an option for members to use, and would enable prompts a bit further away from Tau. Turns out they really liked it, and he got in. How'd you get the guild leader rank? It was after Chill's creator left the group. By that point, I had gotten less shy and was chatting with the other admins and members more regularly over IRC and Skype. The rescuer team leaders had a void in it, and I offered to step up to fill that. The group had been very inspiring, and I felt like I was always having various world building, NPC, and group ideas I wanted to contribute. You might find this next part interesting, actually. I had some difficulty deciding between this Gliscor bounty hunter idea and an Ampharos musician, and after a bit of back and forth with Glib, we agreed the Ampharos concept was something that contrasted well with all the other guild leaders, as the cowboy aesthetic was already being done by Mike. Oh wow, I didn't even know there was more than one option considered. Gliscor is a pain to draw, lol. Yeah. I ultimately think it was the right decision, because I enjoyed drawing and coming up with story ideas for Fresnel a lot. And then Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon came along and made their guild leader an Ampharos. Great minds think alike, I suppose? Maybe it's that light in the darkness theme that comes through so well for a rescue guild leader. I think one of my biggest regrets about Fresnel is actually the state of the guild when he joined. If I remember correctly, Chill leaving resulted in a lot of Mike, the character, running off, being upset. I don't remember the specifics, but it resulted in Fresnel turning into Mr. Swamped with paperwork. So I fear his first impression kind of ended up being that of a whiny, impatient, exhausted grump. Yeah, he did have that kind of impression, even being carried over to the April Fool's stuff. I didn't even like him at first, especially because the full version of Fresnel's Error wasn't uploaded to the wiki, but I ended up liking him a bit more when I did finally find the rest of it. Yeah, I understand that. I had a lot of plans for him, but also never got around writing them. I had this image of him being an upbeat, optimistic adventurer, a breath of fresh air for the guild, but for the longest time, he just ended up being a tired grumpus, and his defining character traits ended up being plays ukulele with no fingers and has zero patience for Mike. Yeah, poor Fresnel. I wanted to be the one to write Fresnel's Error, but I wasn't able to focus on writing the story. I was new to writing compared to art. My peers had already shown themselves to be good writers. So between a lack of confidence, my focus issues, and second-guessing every other line I typed due to perfectionism, it caused me to choke about a chapter in, I think. Ultimately, I think we sent those scraps to the person who did write the story, for them to reference, along with an outline of how I was thinking the rest of the story should go. I still appreciate them a lot for getting the idea out the door. I don't remember why we made Steel City a matriarchy. I think it may have been something about making a technologically advanced place that contrasted really hard with draconian laws and culture. It was an interesting constraint to write a character within. You may remember the line where Anne Barry mentions Fresnel's father passing. In Steel City, males were typically stuck with physical labor and domestic jobs, where women had the privilege of being educated to work in engineering, invention, and technology. Fresnel's father was a miner who worked deeper in the city to expand it outwards, and died in an earthquake that collapsed the tunnel. So, part of Fresnel's hatred of the status quo was because he believes a whole bunch of arbitrary rules killed his dad. 2. Favorite and least liked parts of working on PMDE? My favorite parts of working on PMDE were being able to bounce world building and character ideas off of other people who are excited about the same thing. I mean, many of my current friends are people I met through the community. I lived and breathed PMDE. It's all I could think about for years. I had all these ideas I wanted to do, grand stories I wanted to tell, all stuck in my brain. And that's where the second part of the answer comes in. It wasn't the group ending early where most of these regrets lie. Recently, I finally got a diagnosis for ADHD, something I suspected for a long time. But at the time, 11 to 14 years ago, I didn't know what was up. So, I'd say my least favorite part of working on PMDE was not being able to live up to the potential I felt I had. Constantly disappointing the other admins and myself by hyping up projects that stayed half finished. So desperately wanting to put more things out into the group. Accepting responsibilities for the group because I was always excited to do them, but when it came down to the wire, I choked almost every time. There was supposed to be a follow-up story where Fresnel lived in Mossy Village for years and found his calling as an explorer and learned about the legendary instruments. It's when he would have evolved, too. I'm sure that idea rattled around and evolved in my brain for months, but whenever I try to make it real, I would hit this mental brick wall. Could never focus on the projects long enough to get them out of my head. This, combined with Glip being one of the most prolific artists I've ever met, who just lived and breathed drawing, would crank out story illustrations in just a few hours or even a half hour sometimes. Never seemed afraid to just experiment or leave things kinda messy just to get a piece of art out there. It was both a blessing and a curse being surrounded by so many creative people at the time. I was constantly inspired, but it turns out I was a textbook example of an ADHD creative and had no idea at the time. So it turned into feelings of imposter syndrome and guilt over being flaky with my ideas and admin responsibilities. 3. Were you treated nicely by the members and other admins? Yes, I was. I was friends with every admin, really, and stayed friends with Show's creator after they left the group, too. I was also a frequent participant in the IRC and had a lot of fun there. I was actually worried for a bit, because this was fresh out of high school, about how the group would respond to Fresnel being gay. I was the only admin at the time who was strictly gay, and the other guild members had already had male-female ships going on in the community. So I was the one bringing the first openly gay character to the cast, and I was nervous. But thankfully, he was received well, and I don't remember seeing any people be weird about it. Oh shoot, I actually didn't know Fresnel was gay. I don't even think I remember seeing that fact stated anywhere. I don't remember if or where it ever popped up in the front-facing story stuff, honestly. A lot of it was him busy being grumpy about his job, but it wasn't a secret among the IRC. I guess it was so common knowledge among people who were regularly in chat that maybe we forgot to explicitly mention it in any official content. Oops. In retrospect, I wish it was a bit more explicit at some point, because I think a specific part of Fresnel's era lands a bit differently if you know he's not actually into girls. 4. How was working on music with the admins? Did you have any guidelines, or were you free to create whatever you wanted? I was pretty free to do what I wanted. None of the admins were really music savvy at the time, so I don't think they bothered with asking for much other than a song for Something Happens or It Should Feel mood, and trusting that we knew how to get to that point. On the music side of things, Pengo ended up being the prolific one that intimidated me with how much stuff they cranked out. I always struggled somewhat with finishing songs or knowing how to fill out a song with more layers without making it sound like mud. So I'd get stuck on them sometimes. Yeah, Pango did pump out a lot of tracks during that time, but I think they're mostly hit or miss for me. You and Rushy Dove were really the ones that sold the show in terms of music. Especially Guillotine's Beckoning. I could actually hear that being a track for a popular Flash game. It's really good. Thanks. I still like the atmosphere in that one. If I could go back, I'd probably make it a bit shorter or make the brass instruments a bit louder. The prompts for that one was something like, there was this Haxorus character, and I don't remember if we were working with them, but it was a bit of a warfare strategy scene, so I listened to a lot of Fire Emblem Awakening stuff for inspiration. I used some choirs fading in to get that old school PMD vibe, and also I think the pulsing synth in some places was because Super Mario Galaxy was my big orchestral VGM inspiration, and they did that for siege levels or boss fights. The harpsichord part might be a little out of place in retrospect, but I don't know. I think my thought was, if I didn't keep it in there, there wouldn't be a musical cue that this was taking place in the past. Alright, I think you covered most of 6, but it won't hurt to ask. 6. Besides producing music, what else did you contribute to the group? I talked about Barty and Fresnel. I don't remember if Steel City was a collab or not between me and Glib. I think they had the name, map position, and base content for a technologically advanced isolationist city. When I was brainstorming with them on where Fresnel could have come from, that place sounded the best. I think we worked together on everything else about the city that came through in that story. My memories are murky on who came up with what though. The appearance of Mossy Village, with it being an elevated city with silk bridges, was my idea too. I had already thought a lot about the city as part of Fresnel's backstory, and sent Glib some simple sketches of what I was envisioning. When the time came for it to be part of a mission prompt, they painted the environment art pretty faithfully to the sketches. One other thing that was my idea was one addition to team progression. You know how the group kinda rewarded you for participating by giving you a currency for accessories and stuff you could buy? Like goggles or a scarf, or an item with a small gameplay bonus you could potentially write into your stories, or just get the goggles. The goggles just look cool. I introduced the idea of artifacts, which were items you could buy with this progression currency. The idea was they were items that would function as a Pokemon move, and were often stylized after an iconic Pokemon that used the move. For instance, a smoke bomb might be a kinda lumpy purple thing evoking the coughing line aesthetically, and it would let you cast smoke screen. I thought it'd be a fun thing for members to play around with. Alright, since 7 was answered earlier, I think we can skip that. 8. Were there any ideas you had for Fresnel / any other character's future had you been able to stay and PMD Explorers continued? Yeah, actually, I think it was around the end of PMDE, or right after it ended, that my friendship with Gunpowder's creator kinda rapidly took off. We joke sometimes that if the story kept going, Gunpowder and Fresnel would have actually ended up a couple. But then it stopped being a joke when we realized that they would actually have been pretty cute together. They're both lonely characters that had a lot of rough edges because they were lonely, and the companionship would have been good for them. Wow, I didn't even consider them a couple. They didn't have much interaction at all, really, but me and his creator were close. If anything, we felt that would have made it an even better opportunity, because that meant there was a blank slate there to come up with a meet cute, or something to start that spark. It's not that there never was chemistry, but there hadn't been a chance for it. I suppose that's the benefit of collaborative writing there. We both knew how our characters worked, and were like, yeah, actually I could see that happening, and it's a cute idea. So consider that a fun bit of post-mortem trivia. Once we found a place for it, Fresnel and Gunpowder would have ended up boyfriends. That is really interesting. I did also want Fresnel to meet up with Mary again down the line. Fresnel struggled with a how can I face her again sort of insecurity for years, of course. He was hoping that evolving into Ampharos and becoming a guild leader would give him stories to share and the confidence to seek her out. But a lot of his screen time was being exhausted with Mike running off doing his own thing instead of helping with the guild. And then Mike got sent back in time, so he had to solo run the guild even more. None of that made him feel proud, really, just exhausted. So he didn't get the chance to feel ready. Alright, I realize now that I accidentally skipped over questions, so I'll ask that now. 5. Do you have any other music that didn't end up being put in the official playlist? And if so, could I upload them to my channel? I think I have two? Wait, is that what's in the crate? Yeah, keep reading. There's one called Zaru Cafe, and the other one was for, I think, the VN update that was right before the group ended, or was scrapped because the group ended. Don't remember which. This was for a scene involving Jasmine the Celebi waking up? Waking someone else up? I don't remember. I just called it Rise and Shine. I don't remember there being a VN posted before the group ended, besides the April Fool's ones. I also didn't know Zaru had a cafe. Yeah, I don't remember the specifics. Maybe it was Zaru's cafe. Maybe it was just for a scene of Zaru at a cafe. I think there were Dratini. I don't remember. There were. I think it was a plot VN where everyone successfully got back to the present. Long time ago, and I haven't thought about the details in probably a decade. To my recollection, burnout while working on that was a large part of why the group was cancelled. Feel free to archive these two on your YouTube if you'd like, though. It's a part of my life I still look fondly back on as a source of inspiration, but it's also so far back that it feels a little weird uncovering old stuff like this. I'm not ashamed or anything, but I'm also doing different things these days. But maybe some people find these sorts of discoveries interesting and fun, and if they know, you know? Yep. Anything else you were curious about? Now that I think about it, are you and Gunpowder's owner still in touch? Yeah, we are. We play games and stuff regularly. I've stayed close with Gunpowder and Shroomsworth's creators throughout everything. They were both a lot angrier and personally hurt by certain things than I was, though, and I think they'd prefer to leave this part of their lives behind them. For me, I suppose there came a point where a rift had already formed between the rest of the people in the group, and the crack eventually came between my feet and I had to make a choice. I stuck around with Floriverse for a little while because it was still ticking all the boxes that PMDE did for me at first. But then all of the call-out posts and controversy stuff flared up, and was really exhausting and traumatic to see constantly. I realized that I needed to heal and grow as my own person, and distance myself from that environment. I guess at the end of the day, while I'm no longer in contact with certain people on the other side of that rift, I personally don't hate them. But we can't be a part of each other's lives anymore. I think I was making the dynamic unhealthy for myself too. I was the only other guild leader who was a visual artist, and my proximity to Glib led me to turning them into this art mentor figure in my head. I ended up beating myself up a lot because I was comparing myself to the sheer amount and variety of art they would put out. I didn't realize it at the time, but I think flying the nest was an important choice I made, and I do feel more confident and independent as a creator these days. To this day, I still miss the creative environment that PMDE in the early days of Floriverse provided for me. I wish there were more things like it. The feeling of being part of a tight-knit community of people with the same goal, bouncing ideas off of each other to add things to a project that we're all excited about, and seeing how all that collaboration melds together as a story unfolds. I found something similar through a D&D group I joined some years back actually. It's quite nice and satisfies a craving for collaborative storytelling and world building that PMDE made me realize I had deep within my bones. But I would still like to find myself in another group again someday, to work together on something an audience can experience. Some sort of game or world building project. It feels like my element. Alright, now that leaves the funny bonus question. Anything else you wanted to add before we get to that? Not that I can think of. Alright, on to that bonus question. 9. Can I have Fresnel, other characters you made in PMDE as OCs? Okay, before you say anything, read the response. Sorry, but Fresnel is still pretty special to me. I consider him my first real OC, honestly. The first one that actually had story meat to go along with the design. I also have my own little head world tying together various Pokemon OCs that I doodle now and then. And I sometimes wonder about a way to reboot him through that, since some of my friends are still fond of him. I respect the hustle for asking though, but I'm curious, why not just make your own things inspired by PMDE? Why reuse the characters? Originally, I asked that question to Luvachi because, ha, Shroom's worth husbando, but I wasn't expecting him to say something like, I don't mind it. And then, shortly after that, I had this idea of, what if I took the characters and made like a little world for them where they can be happy and not have to live in eternal purgatory with the long-lasting memories of their past. That and I hate the idea of missed potential. Yeah, I understand that. But I think it's also important to consider that, to me at least, Fresnel doesn't live in eternal purgatory. To most of us, we did have an ideal future planned out for our characters. Just because they weren't realized doesn't mean they aren't part of the character in our hearts. As far as I'm concerned, Fresnel and Gunpowder get together. Fresnel gets to do some heroic stuff. Fresnel gets to face Mary with pride. Fresnel doesn't languish for me. He's a lesson I take with me. He's my foundation as a character writer. And I also know anything I may have potentially written for Fresnel back then would be worse than something I'd come up with now. But that's the nature of things we make when we were younger. I think I get it. I guess as long as the heart and imagination are there, then so will be the character, living with their creators and going on their own adventures for the foreseeable future. They don't truly die until their creators don't want anything to do with them anymore. Is that right? Yeah, precisely. I've thought about how I could try and recapture the magic for years, honestly. As a character creator and as a dabbling game dev, wishing that some of my favorite games had just a little bit more. Had a sequel, had another expansion. It's also why eventually I stopped wanting to be a Fakemon artist. Fan work is a great thing, especially when you're figuring out what you want to do. It's where I started, but I also eventually realized this. If I'm inspired enough by something to want to put more of it into the world, to feel the joy about it that I felt, I can't be completely beholden to what the previous creators did. So, why do I like something? I try to channel that answer into new things I create. What feeling really stuck out to me in a scene? Understand what led up to that in the story, and recreate those circumstances in your own thing. I miss what could have been too, but I carry that forward and use it as fuel for new characters. If people loved Fresnel, they'll love any future character I make who captures similar parts of who he is. It won't have the old sentimentality, but it also won't have the baggage. But it will have the soul, and that's the part that really captures the heart. I see. I'm not even going to question why it sounded like that was happening in real time when it's supposed to be a piece of paper. Because you're holding an Elder Scroll. Wait, what? Anyway, could you tell them thanks for the interview? Yeah, sure. Aw, dang it!